The Winter Latina Show.
Hosted by IDM.
All right, and we are recording, not live today. How are you, Nina?
Welcome to another installment of the Winter Latina Show. I'm really excited about this one because we have a special guest on our show. It's Dr. Karin Kneissl. I apologize for mispronouncing the German. I tried. Everyone knows that Dr. Karin is an Austrian diplomat, academic, journalist. She is a polyglot and a polymath. I think it's fair to say she specializes in a number of fields ranging from international relations to the realm of the energy market. So I think we're going to try to discuss a lot of these topics today. So welcome, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. My German is very rusty.
No, your German is perfect. Good evening to both of you, to you as a host and to your technician. I just learned that you're located in Italy, and I'm speaking, so to say, via three continents, actually.
Three continents, yes. Today is very, well, we could say that Eurasia is a supercontinent, so, and, Europe is, as I always say, Europe is the peninsula of Eurasia, so it's either two or three. So this is, I'm really happy to have you here. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I've been following you on social media. I obviously find your expertise really, really elucidating in this age of, media, Western media echo chamber. Well, maybe not just Western media, but just in general. It's really nice to find outside perspectives. So before we jump into your expertise in politics, I wanted to ask a very, very selfish question. I am, as you know, probably a dog lover and animal lover. So I wanted to ask, how did you get started with, it seems like you have many animals. You post about them on social media, animals that I don't have. I think I might have seen some ponies. Am I correct? Yes. Yeah. So I just wanted to know where does this love for animals come from? What animals you have right now? Like I said, it's a very selfish first question for me, but I think it's very relatable. So.
Thank you very much. Animals connect, and when I was 7-year-old, my father came home with a boxer dog whom my mother rejected. My parents then soon afterwards divorced, and I was the one who took care of the dog, and the dog took care of me, because when I was 10, 11, 12, honestly, I wouldn't have made it without this best friend. Whenever there was a problem at school, I talked to him, and I knew he would not betray me. He would keep all secrets for himself, and that's the wonderful characteristic that animals have. You tell them all what is on your heart, and they keep it for themselves. So after that dog followed another dog, and it was somehow always my dream to have a little farm. Not this nostalgic farm for farm life is not easy wherever. Either it goes into intense farming, which is then industrial, or if you really want to survive with a tiny little farm and have help, it's not easy. So I had, I wouldn't call it a farm, but I had always my two boxer dogs over the last 20 years. I always had a couple. Wow. They were always rescue dogs. And the first contact address I had in Russia was the Boxer Help Association of Moscow. And now the Boxer Help people of St. Petersburg, they help my dog and me a lot. And this also connects, boxer people from Austria or from Russia.
Very interesting. My mom's first dog as a child was a boxer, and obviously I've never met her. I think she might have been around your age, maybe a little bit older, but I've seen pictures of her, and there's this family lore around this boxer whose name was Maggie, and she was this beautiful, muscular animal. So even before I had dogs, or we had dogs as a family, I always thought about this boxer. So I've never had a boxer myself, but it's always been this sort of idealized image of a dog. So it's interesting that this is the breed that you've chosen.
They're the perfect animal family dogs. And
Yeah.
so when I quitted diplomacy, I was 33, and my first thought after 10 years without dog, how to get a dog. And I went to the countryside outside of Vienna. I found a little house to rent, and after the dog came a cat, another cat, then came the chicken, then an old horse, which I had also adopted, and the horse couldn't be on its own, so I got the ponies. And that's how everything grew. And I was cleaning the stable for about 23 years. That was my first thing in the morning. I went to the stable, cleaned it, and I also did this while serving as a minister. I cleaned the stable because I didn't write my else. So,
do people know this, that you were cleaning stables before you went to engage in very important government affairs? Wow, that's amazing.
yeah,
Do you think it kept you kind of more like it's good, like physical labor? Some people say physical labor is good for the soul. I'm not sure if you found that in it beyond taking care of the animals.
Yeah, it was not only this physical labor. When I was a freelancer for about 20 years, it gave me a lot of structure for the day. You're a freelancer, you know, it's how it is to structure a day, and cleaning and feeding, all that structured my day. And then as a minister, it was, of course, there were weeks when it was horribly tough because I had to find a replacement for me. I always managed somehow, but sometimes it was really in the very last minute, who will walk the dogs, who will clean the stable. But we managed, somehow we managed. And in those days, the animals gave me warmth and unconditional love, as they do. And also the feeling of you got something done. You know, because I had
intangible. Sometimes politics seems like there's a lot of talk, not a lot of action.
And since you mentioned this very nice adjective of tangible, I said that in the morning when I was in the horse shit, you know, I had the tangible shit. During the day, I had the non-tangible shit.
The non-tangible, the figurative, right? Which one was preferable?
I prefer the one I can smell, you know.
Stables at least were the stables were at least, you know, cleanable.
Yeah.
Politically, maybe not so much. So, wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize you had this sort of menagerie of different animals. So, would you? I mean, I guess it's difficult to pick a favorite animal when they're all sort of really sentient.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've never had horses, but as a little girl, I think lots of little girls love drawing horses. I don't know, there's some aesthetic thing about it that really attracts young artists to do this. So I'm not sure if you've had sort of more of a connection to the horses or the dogs, or I guess there's probably no distinction for you.
Well, I would say the dog. If I have to make a choice, luckily I managed somehow to move all my animals. I left Austria with 2 dogs and 2 suitcases to France. Then later on, I managed to have the ponies moved. I even managed to move my aquarium, but then when I was kicked out from France, I left the aquarium there with people who took the aquarium because I knew I would go to Lebanon where there's not enough electricity for an aquarium. And so that's how my aquarium ended up in a restaurant in France, but the fish are still living there and doing well. And my cats and ponies and dogs I took to Lebanon with DHL. And in Lebanon, we moved twice. And then from Lebanon via Syria, we arrived in Russia last September. And all that was quite an odyssey, but I said never without my animals, because in spring,
it's like Noah's Ark, but on land, essentially. I mean, they sound like they're international travelers, but it also sounds like it's not all by choice in your case, right? Moving this much. So I've seen that the media described you as a political refugee, but I'm not sure if this is a term you would use yourself. How do you perceive the current situation and having to move from place to place in the recent couple of years?
Well, in summer 2020, I realized that after 1 year without any kind of contract and work in Austria, our government imploded in 2019. I didn't regret, that I was not anymore minister. I knew that it would be difficult to take up my former activity, which was an independent analyst. I had my little company. I was teaching here and there. But I had to realize that there was not a single contract. And that became a growing financial problem for me in spring 2020, plus the pandemic. And then there was a tremendous media campaign against me for many reasons. One major reason in Austria was most probably the fact that I had never ever paid the media in terms of, I call it this mafia money, that you pay in order to have nice reports. I said, I don't need nice reporting. In Austria, there's a lot of corruption.
I'm kind of shocked by the way that you have to pay the media. I'm unfamiliar with, at least in North America, this would not be discussed in public. So this is
in Austria. I mean, I have no problems in saying it. I said it in Parliament. I said it. I witnessed it in court, and my book is also about it. So there is a tremendous degree of corruption in Austria, which has its ramifications on the one hand between what political parties, ministers are ready to pay to publishing houses, running newspapers, running websites, whatever, in order to have nice, pleasing communication. It has nothing to do with journalism, it's communication. And this, as you say, would never be possible in North America, where it's not possible that a politician, for instance, would take along free of charge a delegation, let's say, of 100 journalists who then write wonderful reports. Oh, the minister said this and that, and how great and how wonderful. But this, unfortunate, is the day-to-day practice in a country like Austria. And I did not pamper journalists. I said, you can write whatever you want. I don't care. You can travel wherever I am, but I'm not going to pay your hotel, your whiskey, etc. This is up to you how you finance it. Because I myself, when I worked as an independent correspondent, I paid always all my journeys myself, because I did not want to be on the payroll of an institution, of a company, of a government. I was one of the few people who regularly traveled to Iran, but I paid it myself. And this gives you, this economic independence gives you freedom of mind. And that always I cherished, and I paid a high price for it. It was not that I had the money. I slept on airports. I lived with very little budgets, but I made my journeys.
Of course, and like you're saying, you were not essentially a PR agent that was like on a retainer of, from what I understand, a government official, which is, again, to me sounds really shocking. Do you think this could be sort of a maybe broader comment about the state of the media in general? Because back in the day, yes, of course, perhaps people idealized the media, 20, 30 years ago, but at least there used to be a clear distinction between factual reporting of such and such event happened on such and such day, such and such ministers met, and it didn't matter if they were from a hostile country. The reporting would just be factual. And then there's a separate thing called an opinion piece, and that this is an editor or someone writing for this publication, they're expressing an opinion, and that's going to have some kind of a political trajectory, some kind of an ideological basis, but you could differentiate between the two. Nowadays, when you are logging onto a media website, it's telling you what to think in what's supposed to be, factual news reporting. And, I have to sometimes go to Chinese or Russian media to just read what happened without having that editorializing telling me what I should think about it. And I think it's fine to have these opinion pieces, even if they're propagandistic, even if they're highly politicized, because for the general public, there would still be that distinction. But these days, it just seems like it's essentially this narrative that's being sold to you. And so do you think the situation with the media in Austria that you're describing can be, made into a broader comment about the state of media at large, perhaps in Europe? I don't know if, the West is obviously a very loaded term, but what is your take on it?
Well, I was always very careful to speak about freedom of media by and large, because whenever we discuss, for instance, this topic in Lebanon, and Lebanon definitely has one of the oldest acts of freedom of media, and there is until today a very sound degree of freedom. But I always said this legal freedom needs an economic underpinning. And as long as news outlets had their subscribers, had their how do you call it, the reclama that you put in the advertisement.
Advertising.
Thank you very much, the advertising. I'm also now too long in Russia, so the reclama.
Reclama, yes.
The advertising that you put in, it was a give and take. And many years ago, I think about 24 years ago, I organized myself a supplement for a big German paper on Lebanon. And I was also in charge of organizing the advertisements for this 5-page supplement on Lebanon. The articles I could write in 3 days, but the advertisement hunting was quite something. And so I'm aware of the decline in income. It's a tremendous decline that is there. Some started to really sell themselves out, and by selling their soul, and what we mentioned before in this communication as opposed to journalism, this started to happen a long time ago. Actually, it was one of the consequences of the war in Vietnam, because the Pentagon had realized that never ever again we want to have such a domestic front with TV cameras on the battlefield. So we better create a press department and tell the press what they will write, and we will give them the sound bites. That was in the 1970s. And then other companies said, oh, this is a good idea. So we will invite journalists. We take them to our company. We explain them and we give them papers, which they then can make little variations. But journalism became more and more communication. And also the courses that were taught, I saw it in Austria and in Germany, the titles of those courses were called Journalism and Communication. And I always rebelled as a teacher against those titles, because I said, these are two different pair of shoes. If you work for a big cosmetic company and you're into communication, yes, you sell these lipsticks and you just appraise them. But if you want to be a journalist and you want to ask nasty questions or good questions, or you want to be persistent, it's a totally different story. You have to know the topic. And so I think that it was the beginning of the decline was in the early 1970s with the beginning of press departments by the Pentagon, and then everybody else did it. And then came the increasing economic problems. I would say nowadays it's total mistrust in the media by many. So I don't know how they will ever regain this trust. It's for a long time, I was still subscribed to 2-3 weeklies and newspapers, but also those went the reporting was so poor that I stopped it. And I subscribed to Substacks or followed some bloggers. And I'm grateful to the fact that I still was able to read some newspapers that were worth the name. But this age is over. What might be next? I have no idea, but I think that if I were asked to establish a news outlet, I would only do it on a local level, because it's in this local news that you might still get something, like.
Sure. Well, I feel you can always make that comment about politics, where things may get down at a municipal level or perhaps regional level, and then you go to the higher level of, federal, or even, if you think about the super state that is the European Union, then bureaucracy may be moving at a glacial speed. But it's really interesting that you're linking this to the war in Vietnam as a very particular point in time, because as we know, there is still a particular American journalist who is still around, who published certain things at that time, who is still operational, and he is publishing on his Substack, and he talked about, things like the Nord Stream sabotage. So it's kind of interesting that there are, people that were highly acclaimed and award-winning at this time, and these days they are publishing on independent platforms rather than writing for the New York Times or the Washington Post or all of these big publications that used to be considered very respectable and legitimate, et cetera. So I'm not sure if this splintering of the media is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it may have had to happen because of the problems that you're describing. But at the same time, I guess it's a little bit more difficult to discern between the media sources and all this alternative media that is out there, because everyone is competing for attention, which, like you're saying, even when it comes to alternative media, there may be a little bit of this PR and communication versus actual reporting. But it's definitely almost like a sad comment on people who go into journalism with very noble motivations, like you're saying, asking difficult questions, asking nasty questions, and then they realize that they kind of have to focus on climbing up the proverbial career ladder if they want to make it in that field, and then they're very much limited in terms of what they can say. But perhaps some of them just don't even care. I'm not sure if it's a very cynical way of looking at it. So yeah.
And it's the, I would say, the biggest trouble that I see on many areas, whether it's media, diplomacy, education, intergenerational contact, welfare state, it's trust. Trust is gone. And without trust, it's impossible to create any long-term interaction, whether it's a contract, whether it's a social system. So this disappearance of trust, of course, gives now way to chaos. It's some sort of anarchy, and within this chaos, as the Greeks said, it was always, in the Greek version, chaos is something positive, something new can come out of it. But currently, we have a very high degree of confusion among many people. I called my Western colleagues already 7-8 years ago, and they were not very happy about it. Of course, I understand them. I called them the teenagers. And I said in 2018, after a few months being in office, I said, if I want to meet an adult, I have to travel to Moscow, to Beijing, to Islamabad, but certainly not to Brussels and to some Western capitals. And this kind of highly emotional, not thought through activism. It has nothing to do with political action. It's only activism. Stand with Ukraine, stand with Israel, stand with Taiwan. It's running around like teenagers and not wishing to talk to people because they are upset, they feel insulted or whatever. So this has brought us into a tremendous degree of confusion, irrationalism, and the media is just, as you said, the echo chamber of a lot of that. Maybe some people just abandon then all kind of reporting. They prefer to be on their cooking videos or gardening videos. I fully understand that, because you need something. You need your garden. You need to cultivate your garden somewhere. And the more I am impressed when I give a public lecture, whether I did it in Austria in former days or whether I do it today, that people still are interested in wishing to understand what's going on between Israel and Gaza, what's going on here and there. It's because it takes an additional effort when you are bound by your own domestic problems, your money running, breadwinning, loans, and then you go in the evening to a lecture. Wonderful. That people still care about that. It's getting less and less, but people still want to know, people still want to buy a book and read a book in order to understand why did it start like this and where do we stand. So Russia is definitely a nation of book readers and publishing. It's much more in France because where I lived, I was subscribed to 2 cultural associations, and every week there was a new book presentation, which makes life interesting because you go to a debate club, and it was a very, very nice library I went to in Nîmes. Here I have not yet found something like that, but maybe I will find something like that,
if you're going to move to a more rural environment, it might be more of an online setting. So it's
maybe an online setting, or maybe I do there something in the immediate surrounding. We will see. But I think that reading and really getting into it in terms of also. Just as a footnote, but with my Russian language teacher, we started, I had then to stop because I was too busy with other things, unfortunately, but we started to read together War and Peace.
Oh my gosh. of all the books to pick as a learning experience, I'm not sure. this is pretty masochistic.
It's so topical. And to give you a little anecdote here, because it happened exactly a year ago, I was on the panel in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum with Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Some of our followers might know her because she's very outspoken, very direct. She calls a spade a spade. And in that panel, she said, the West has betrayed us and this and that. And I said, well, it was not for the first time. And I quoted Tolstoy, Wine and Mir, War and Peace. And I said on page 7, in the first dialogue between the host, Anna Pavlovna, and Prince Vasily, this lady, and I liked that quote, I said, don't speak to me about Austria. Не мне говорите об Austria. Austria нас продала. And I quoted that in Russian. Austria has betrayed us. And I said, quote finished, left Tolstoy, War and Peace. You know what the newspapers wrote? Karin Kneissl, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, says Austria betrays Russia. I said, no, it was not me. It was Lev Tolstoy. You know Tolstoy, War and Peace. Of course, many people in Austria don't know Lev Tolstoy. They don't know War and Peace. So this complicates then life because then I am again the top agent and the traitor, the corrupt, etc. But you cannot even anymore make jokes, anecdotes, because people simply lack general.
Or at least present the quote fully of what you're actually saying, which is pretty remarkable. But it's, this does touch upon sort of a broader topic of, some people like to think of history as kind of a linear phenomenon with perhaps continuities and breaks, but other people think of it either as a cycle or a spiral. So what you're describing is more of a cyclical situation. If, we on this channel, we sometimes talk about the fact that we've covered a couple of World War II topics, and we talked about how in Russia, the original War of 1812, the War of Napoleon, used to be known as the Great Patriotic War, and then that moniker was later applied to the 1941-1945 war because that was sort of a bigger war and more current one. So definitely using quotes from Tolstoy about a very, obviously it's about a particular war, but it's very symbolic. We can extrapolate things from it, about the questions of war and peace in general. So definitely there is that idea of a cycle. And so what is your opinion of the cyclical relationship, assuming that it's cyclical, and I'm not sure, maybe you think it's more linear, the relationship between Europe and Russia, or let's say the European Union and Russia, and whether Europe and the European Union are even the same entity, or whether they're two very different things. How do you perceive this question?
We know very well where Africa lies. We know where the Americas are, geographically very clear, but Europe, for me, is more an idea than a geographic notion. Europe is all about individualism, creativity, pluralism, law, and freedom. For me, all that is Europe. Plus a bloody history, plus colonialism, plus totalitarian wars of 20th century. All that is Europe. On the one hand, it's desire, it's projection of hope for many people outside of Europe. For them, Europe is like the honey and milk place. And then you have this factual question, where does Europe lie? Where is it physically to be defined? And here starts the problem, because Eurasia, the landmass of which, as you said before, in Europe, yes, it's a peninsula. It's maybe just the appendix, of it. It's very small as a peninsula. And it's part of this Eurasian landmass. So nobody ever could really define, politically, culturally speaking, where does Europe start, where does it end? Because you have a lot of European legacy in a country like Argentina. It's very, very European.
Brazil,
very European. Chile, it's full of Russians and Croats and Germans and so on. So it's who kept up their piano playing legacy and so on. So they are, to a certain extent, even more European than the countries they left. And then you have, on the other hand, this continent Europe, where some say the Ural is the end of this Europe, geographically speaking, and the Bosporus is also the end. So Turkey is divided in this tiny European part and the Asian part. what about Israel and Lebanon and Algeria? Who sings in the Eurovision contest? The Israelis, the Russians, not anymore. What about the Armenians? Yes, the Azerbaijanis, yes, but not the Algerians, not the Lebanese. So it's a very confused. It's a very confusing situation how to define this Europe. And
you say that politics also informs it, because if you go back to the Cold War, terminology like Eastern Europe, for instance, was specifically created in reference to, the Eastern Bloc, the countries that were under in the political sphere of the Soviet Union. And then today there's almost a little bit of the stigma of, well, they're Eastern European, they're not quite European because they're not Western European, sort of the core of Europe being, France and Germany, for example, and maybe England, although technically it's, off the coast. Do you think there's also this very, very difficult political questions that inform the idea of Europe and what can and cannot be considered Europe, and that's sort of why it's so difficult?
Definitely, it's still there, and Germany most probably is much more Central Europe than Western Europe. This is also the dilemma for Germany, because Germany, in large part, it's very much Central Europe. It's very much this federalism of very small old entities that had their own sovereignty for a long time. But in today's European Union, there are different degrees of Europe, and the European integration, with all my due respect for what once upon a time, it's gone. Once upon a time was the respect for treaties. Pacta sunt servanda. Treaties have to be preserved, have to be respected. As a European, I was always very proud that this Europe was built on treaties. It's gone, because there's no respect anymore for treaties. There is no rule of law anymore. I know this is a very harsh statement, and maybe somebody will react to our conversation, but that's it. I've seen it myself, how courts disappear, how much. Well, anyway, this is another long story about the rule of law. But to come back to your question, the unfortunate aspect of all European integration was that it was only about market, and now we are back to the market, also purchasing arms together. Let's buy arms together. Let's go to war together. This is the bond. But when we speak about the spiritual and the cultural dimension, which Europe always was much more, it was always much more that than market. This was never really seriously integrated in all that integration. At a certain point in time, they invented the European cultural capitals. It was all about PR, choosing some provincial city to give it the feeling, we are somebody on the map, and let's invest there and do some jazz concerts. That's it. But there was no true cultural perception of what Europe means.
Do you think there is a connection to the decline of Christianity as being the dominant religion and leaving a vacuum and not really having anything to fill that vacuum with, that perhaps is one of the issues that you're mentioning?
Definitely. I would subscribe to that question more and more. I didn't 10, 15 years ago. I wrote a book called The Fragmented World, What Comes After Globalization, and I was always very much in favor of a clear separation between rule of state and religion. So I was always very French in that aspect. But I have understood more and more that it's this ignorance of religion, and it's an ignorance when you don't know who were the prophets, who was Jesus, that his father was Joseph, at least on the paper. So that these, when you totally ignore that, you cannot understand any painting in any gallery. And there it starts, definitely. I mean, you can believe, you cannot believe, but you should have a sound knowledge of that legacy. So this is gone. I see that we are more and more in a vacuum of many, many concepts. It's not only religion. It's above all, I would say, the concept of respect, good manners. And with my ignorance about Russia, because before I arrived here, before I started learning Russian, I was totally ignorant. I could answer lots of questions on Iran and Syria or Algeria, but not Russia. It was never on my agenda. I traveled here first time 10 years ago for a few days. So now I see this tremendous spirituality that you have here. It's amazing. And the role of the grandmother, the role of the village, the role of, I would also say there is so much kindness and sweetness here, naivety. The president himself, President Putin himself has said a few months ago, I was naive when it comes to Germany.
Sure. Because he's obviously he's a self-proclaimed Germanophile. So I think my perception of it is that the recent developments have been personally disappointing to him as a man who is a big fan of German culture, not a politician who is in charge of a big country. That's kind of how I've taken statements like this.
There were deep deceptions and disappointment. One major step was definitely this strange interview that former Chancellor Angela Merkel gave 2 years ago when she said, well, the Minsk agreement, it was all about buying time for Ukraine, and we never took it serious. So, of course, this came as a big deception and harsh lesson to the Russians. And the Russians they have a tremendous big heart, and they are so good in forgiving. I get every week the question from journalists or students, will it all be fine again? Will we be friends again? This notion of friend and friendship is very special in Russian. Now the world is also into friendly and unfriendly countries. I always say there is no friendship in international relations. You can create a personal chemistry with your counterpart, which helps when you're in a stalemate, to overcome that stalemate, which advances better the interests you try to converge. But again, when we look at the Russian-German, at the Russian-Austrian, at the Russian-French dialogues that were there, societies of friendship, exchange of academics, and it comes to me as a huge, strange surprise that none of all these people, who really knew Russia well, in contrast to me, who am ignorant, who were profiting from Russian hospitality, who sometimes had very nice posts in Russia, who got lots of money by being on the boards of companies. I never profited from Russian money, even so people, claim that I am the prostitute of the Russian money and so on.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's speaking of the media, yeah, wow.
Yeah, there are lots of, there's a long list of very, very nasty things, the way I'm called. But for me, when I was put under pressure to denounce Russia, to condemn Russia, to say, oh, I'm so sorry I ever spoke to President Putin or to Minister Lavrov and so on, I said, no, not with me. It's not my style. I don't take distance from people. So many people took distance from me because they were afraid for their bank account, if they might still write me WhatsApps or whatever. That's what I heard from some old friends in Austria, people with whom you studied 30 years ago. Anyway.
But also, in your role as a diplomat, I'm just kind of shocked. What is the expectation to just not talk? This was going to be my next question. Do you see that?
I was about to say exactly that.
Do you see that diplomacy is essentially dead? Because Europe, and especially Austria with 19th century luminaries like Clemens von Metternich, right? Like a very famous diplomat. This is what even in the United States, children who are taking AP history level in high schools, they learn about him. So this is sort of the standard that at one point Europeans set for diplomacy in terms of training, in terms of skill, in many cases in terms of language, if they travel to other countries. And these days, and it's very true, it's not so much about friendship, it's about being able to find some commonalities and being able to get along, especially if you are condemned, for the lack of a better word, to coexist on the same in the same continent, within the same geographic proximity. It seems like when there's this thinking of, as you said, teenagers, that entire field is almost waning, if not disappeared. And you still see diplomats of high caliber, maybe like Lavrov and maybe a couple of diplomats in China. But as far as the proverbial West goes, they're really few and far in between. And that's just really disappointing because there is this long history and really setting the tone for everyone else to follow. What is your take on it?
Yeah. In Russia, you will find rational and kind people. And maybe I am now, after 10 months, still, too much fond of Russia, but I haven't met a single profoundly nasty person. I have met some person who were maybe not.
There's this expectation that Russian diplomats are going to speak the language of whatever country they go to. Yeah. There doesn't seem to be that expectation in, let's say, Canada and the United States. In many cases, maybe not all cases. That to me is a little bit shocking because if you specialize in a particular country, you should probably know something about their culture and probably know the language pretty well because this is your specialization and you're the official representative of this country. So this is why I'm just very concerned about the state of diplomacy because it's, it used to be how we solve problems outside of war.
In 2020, I published a book called Diplomatie macht Geschichte. It's a play of words because Macht is power, but also the verb to do. So diplomacy does history, or diplomacy is the power of history. And I was already very skeptical back in 2020 when I published it. I said diplomacy, total decline, coma. But in 2022, it definitely died. It died in Europe. There is no more diplomacy. They want to solve things on the battlefield, as they keep saying. And you have a much higher talent and tradition of diplomats in India, in Pakistan, in Brazil. It's much more in the DNA, I would say, of civil servants there. And also to come back to, for instance, a country like Germany, when you mentioned Metternich beforehand, who actually was German, he came from the Rhineland and moved to Vienna to serve the emperor. He was much too intelligent for the court of Vienna. People were very jealous of him and they considered him as arrogant, snobbish. Yes, I understand him. He didn't want to mingle with certain people. And when you take in contrast to that Otto von Bismarck, who established the first German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was in 1871. And I've written about that a little bit because Bismarck, in his memoirs, he deplores the fact that it was very difficult to recruit German diplomats because the average German aristocrat wanted to become a general and win a battle, but not to become an ambassador and negotiate. You have a diplomatic tradition in Italy. You had Venice, you had Florence, you had Genova, you had Sicily. There were different entities and they had their diplomatic traditions for centuries. And then Italy happened to be united and it became one Italian diplomatic staff with its traditions. And I have met some very impressive Italian diplomats. France has had its diplomatic tradition ever since 17th century with Richelieu and Mazarin. And you have countries where it's a tradition. But in Germany, it's not a tradition. And I encountered throughout my active life as a junior diplomat in multilateral settings, I encountered so many situations where I said to myself, but they are so rude, they are so impolite, they are so aggressive, and these were the times when they still wanted to, not make friends, but make business with everybody. And now it's strange, it's really strange, but it's like back to square one. We are in this war-mongering Germany. Mr. Pistorius, the most popular German politician, defense minister, social democrat, he uses a lexicon, a language that is the language of the 1930s. He uses the same words. I can't translate that into English, kriegstüchtig. No, it's fit for war, but in a very strange way, the language of those guys of the 1930s. And
I don't understand why you're saying that. I think we have the most quality of diplomacy in Germany now with Annalena 360, for example.
Yeah, no,
Nothing can beat that.
it's the Germans, they have a tremendous talent to in German we would say to vor den Kopfstoß. You listen to them and you feel like how should I say, it's not to be insulted, but you just remain speechless. What to do now. So this is definitely right now once again, not for the first time and not for the last time. So it's really interesting when you're a step away from the whole confusion, how history strikes back. Amazing.
I guess what I find really fascinating about the way you're describing specifically Pistorius is that in sort of alternative media circles, especially outside of Europe, the perception is that America just kind of sets the tone and everyone in Europe, America says jump and then everyone says how high. But it seems like there's quite a bit of, at least if I understand you correctly, sort of a local or national desire to participate in perhaps warmongering and all of these other initiatives that are not really benefiting the ordinary people who probably don't want to go to war and would rather focus on their daily life and raising children. What is your take on that in terms of the relationship, the hierarchical relationship between the United States and the European Union or NATO or any of these political entities? I know it's a little bit, sometimes it's hard to tell which one is which because there seems to be an overlap. But what is your impression?
Well, I know that also here in Russia and elsewhere, it's all about the vassals of that Europe is just a vassal of the United States. When I served as a junior diplomat, later on, when I just was teaching international relations, also at an American university, actually in Vienna, and later on when I became minister, my obstacle never ever was the US ambassador. I had a very good relation with the then US ambassador. My really problem as a minister, as a diplomat, as a teacher was the European Commission.
Oh, wow.
Because this European Commission is a tremendous bureaucracy by its own. And it has developed very strangely over the last 30 years. It has lost its orientation, its inner compass. It's full of apparatchiks who are out of touch with reality. It's full of too many political scientists. I mean, with all my due respect to political sciences, but never take too many of them. There should also be some historians, some geographers, some people with a real entrepreneurial background who know how to pay salaries and create a market for their product or whatever. But people are out of touch with reality, and they are serving side shows. They have totally lost the focus, totally. So, yes, of course, the United States have their role. Yes, of course, there is many people went through U.S. Universities. I myself had a scholarship for a U.S. university, but I was never, ever brainwashed by anyone. I was critical all my life, but the problem that I see in anything that is going on right now in Europe is a tremendous bureaucracy called the European Commission, which makes life unbearable, whether it's for farmers, red tape killing the Green Deal, etc., whether it's for students, this is another long story, but to make a long story short, the day there will be talks again, it will be Moscow speaking to the United States, whoever will be there in power, because there's nobody you can seriously talk to in Europe. There's no vis-a-vis for Moscow. You can't talk to the circus in the European Commission. And so we will see whether there is a more serious or a less serious, but there will be some sort of power establishment in Washington. And as President Putin and as others have said, there is a constant channel of communication between the intelligence community. They make sure that certain things don't get out of control. So that technical context, and sooner or later there will be some sort of political whatever.
You say there is less communication now than during the Cold War between, let's say, the Soviet Union, Europe, United States.
Yes, I mean, during the Cold War, people traveled, there was academic exchange, all that. You don't have it now. Russia has become a planet. It's a nice planet, I like it. But to come here is like traveling to a different planet. And I will not, whatever I plan for my life, nobody can plan for a long time for their life, but I will stay on this planet, and luckily it's big. It's not Slovenia, Slovakia, Austria. It's really big. So
there's just a lot of things, when you start looking at the Cold War, sort of this, what you thought was a pinnacle of global confrontation, where things seem to be clearer. There were certain red lines that you would not cross. Going back to the topic of the media, you really didn't see. I mean, there might be some exceptions that I can't think of, but you didn't really see the media and politicians flinging really dirty insults towards leaders of other countries, even if they really did not like their ideology and considered them to be an opponent in the geopolitical sense and ideological sense. Today, you can have a politician call, whether it's Putin or China's leader, a tyrant, a dictator, a mass murderer, and then you can have a meeting with them the next day. And to me, that is absolutely shocking. I guess it also goes back to the collapse of diplomacy, but all those things that were much more clear during the Cold War no longer seem to exist as on a systemic level. Again, there might be some exceptions to this. And it's a little bit scary, just this world of what seems to be very chaotic. I mean, I know you said chaos. The Greeks think that eventually something good hopefully will arise from it if we survive it, right? Granted, we survive it. But this really lack of distinction, this lack of being able to predict things sometimes, even though sometimes they are predictable, is really kind of like you feel like you don't really know what's coming next.
Yeah. I was born in 1965, and in 1980 I joined first demonstration. It was all about the nuclear
armament,
arms race, and NATO put in, I don't know what they call it in English, NATO Doppelbeschluss. And that was the first demonstration I went into, and we grew up, we were afraid of mutual assured destruction. It's this is what we learned, this is what we were told. And growing up in Austria, it was like 40 kilometers away from the Iron Curtain. So there was this shadow. And then in the early 1990s, of course, it was like, dream world and everything will be nice. But we know that as of 1991, with the collapse of Yugoslavia, it got, it was just a prelude of something bigger to come. The breakdown of that federation entailed a lot of things that then happened in Iraq and in Afghanistan and elsewhere. But the absence of manners, the absence of rational people, the absence of respect, all that has brought us into this current situation. And what we can hope for is that on the Western side, especially in Europe, there might be a little bit more adults in the room. And in the European Union, there are no adults in the room. In the US...
That's really harsh, but that's really sobering. I'm sorry, Marcelo, did you mean to have a countdown on?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would like also to have a question about precisely Austrian diplomacy. So we've been used to an Austria which is doesn't have a side on things. I'm missing the word here.
Well, neutral.
Neutral, exactly. A neutral Austria, and also Switzerland by chance. But recently, we've been seeing Austria pivoting away from this neutrality. Is this really happening? And how do you see this? If it was really neutral before, or there was always some thing? And I just have one quick question. just to connect with that, is that so there was some news on Euronews reporting growing cases of anti-Semitism in Austria, and I know you're not living there now, so maybe this will be a little shady to answer, but would that be a consequence of what's happening, or do you think this can also be just a smearing of people that are against the Israel-Gaza situation?
First of all, on neutrality, the Austrian neutrality differs legally from what we have in Switzerland or what we had in Sweden. It was the Austrian neutrality actually came as an idea from Moscow. In 1953, Moscow suggested that. The Austrians were not too much happy about it. They didn't want to become neutral, but in the end, the Staatsvertrag, the state of the treaty that guaranteed the sovereignty of Austria in 1955, gave Austria a fresh start, and neutrality became, for me, my generation, I'm not the only one, a new reference for nationhood. So the practice of neutrality, especially under Chancellor Kreisky, was all about we talk to everybody. We are the meeting ground. Khrushchev, Kennedy, PLO. So it was a meeting ground. But already 24 years ago, when there was a conservative government with the right-wingers, they wanted to join NATO. It was like, forget about neutrality. This is something of the past. We want to join NATO. And actually, the moment Austria had joined the European Union in 1995, and I voted against it in the referendum then, because as a legal scholar, I said it's not possible. You cannot be part of a political union and remain neutral. Impossible, you know. And of course, as a minister, I had to interpret it in a different way. I said, yes, we joined as neutral, but as minister, I tried to talk to everybody, and I tried to not jump on the bandwagon just of some capital that tells you what to do. So now we have the situation that countries like Hungary, Turkey are much more neutral, even though they are part of a military alliance. But in the case of Ukraine, in the case of other situations, they behave like neutral. They behave like the go-in-betweens, which Austria is not the case. Austria is totally betraying its neutrality, because ever since now the European Council has decided to use the windfall profits from money that was confiscated of the Russian assets. So now they use this money to purchase weapons. So Austria is also not anymore military neutrally. It's really violating its own constitution. So this is a big. It's not only a political problem. I would say it's a legal problem, and it could even amount to an international problem, because Austria's status is guaranteed by 4 big powers: United Kingdom, France, US, and former Soviet Union, Russian Federation. So this is one thing. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, racism, etc., let me say the following. At a very late age of my stage, I had to understand that it was not a coincidence that Adolf Hitler came from Austria. He was not from Sicily, he was not from Ireland, he was not from the Caucasus, he came from Central Europe, from the surroundings of Vienna, for good reasons. I know that this is also a very harsh statement, but I have my arguments for that. If you want, we can prolong that in another debate. I write in my book, Requiem for Europe, and Hitler did not fall out from the sky in 1938, 33. He grew up in this Central Europe, in this Vienna of, how should I say, of a constant schizophrenia. Who are the Austrians? I say Austrians are German-speaking Slavs. And yeah, that's it. I'm not a historian, I'm not a sociologist, but we can discuss it. It's a long chapter of history, but it was.
I would love to have you on again, because this is definitely, obviously, I have heard related arguments, but never quite phrased in this way. And so I would
it
love
just
to...
made me extremely interested in this argument.
Yeah, and Austria, you know, it was Vienna that started 2 world wars. Vienna. You know? It was 1914, the Crown Prince, yes, but the Viennese pushed for going to war against Russia. And it was Vienna that said in 1906 already, the giant Russia cannot be defeated on the battlefield. They were more intelligent then than Pistorius today. It cannot be defeated on the battlefield. It has to be destroyed from the inside. That was Vienna diplomacy prior to World War I.
It sounds harsher than Britain, actually. It sounds harsher than London in some ways.
But they were much harsher for various reasons, because it was about a battle of spheres of interest in Southeast Europe, the Balkans, the Orthodoxy versus Catholics. And the day a Russian Grand Duke called himself Tsar, he challenged the monopoly of the Habsburgs, who had the Kaiserkrone. You know, they considered themselves as the immediate heirs to the Holy Roman Empire. And then there was another dynasty, the Romanovs, who wanted to also claim to have a Caesarian aspect in their dynasty. And all that led to tremendous rivalry between Moscow, Vienna, and Petersburg, Vienna. And then, of course, there was the fight for interest in the Balkans. The Serbs supported by the Russians versus the Croatians supported by the Austrians, Bosnia, etc., etc. There are many, many aspects. And because the hatred against me in Austria, we discussed at length my way of handling the media. But of course, there was another topic. It was because I was considered as a Russian agent, Russian corrupt. It's another big topic. But I felt, as of 2018, a degree of Russophobia I was not aware of. Oh, wow. I really didn't know that it could be so
even before the escalation in Ukraine. Interesting.
Was there, and in 2020, I was accused of having the Novichok formula with which Alexei Navalny was allegedly.
Oh my gosh.
I was
this just sounds like a tabloid. I mean, it doesn't sound like this could not be real.
No, I was accused of cooking Novichok and of experimenting it on dogs.
Wow.
So that was the moment.
I mean, it's funny, but it really isn't funny if you think about the implications of that.
I always said, luckily I'm not a man, because if I were a man, they definitely would have accused me many, many times of rape, sexual harassment. I would have to go through something like Julian Assange and others. But luckily I'm not a man, so I am only the witch. I'm only the Russian prostitute, which is easier to handle. I experienced in Austria a degree of hatred. It was in summer 2020 that in the streets I was attacked as a Russian pig. And that's when I decided to quit. You know, I felt something that I understood in summer 2020, how it all started in the 1930s. I had always defended my people. The first time I had BBC Hard Talk in 2018, I was accused of being an anti-Semite and right-wing extremist, and I don't know what. I defended my people, my society against all those attacks, because I said we are not all National Socialists, etc., etc. But I understood in 2020, because I had always said people were hungry, people were jobless in the 1930s. Many people were hungry and jobless, but they did not do what the Austrian did.
I see.
You know, and you
so
could
it seems like you're not. So what happened to you on the street? It doesn't. It seems like you're drawing some kind of a deeper reason for it, instead of, let's say, just the media instigating that type of hysteria.
It's much, much deeper. And when I lived in France, I did not have this hatred. You know, when I said to my neighbors in France, I will be gone next week, I go to Moscow for teaching, my neighbors in France in the little village would say, oh, how interesting. I always wanted to visit Russia. I have read Tolstoy and so on. So there's this cultural component, which is not in Austria, it's not in Germany, and it's not in Poland for other reasons, you know. So it's all about geography, shared history. It's a tremendous mix of many, many factors. And so when it comes to Europe and Russia, of course, in Portugal, in Ireland, have different ideas. People have different problems. The Portuguese feel more close to problems in Latin America than to what's going on in Belarus. They don't care. So this has to do with geography, and geography is the constant factor of history, as old Bismarck said. To come back to Austria and anti-Semitism and so on, it's not right-wing anti-Semitism. It's not Muslim anti-Semitism, which is adding now to the problem. It's what I call the Catholic anti-Semitism. The Jews killed baby Jesus. And this is very, very deeply enrooted in Austria. When I was 18, 19, I went to Israel because I was working there and I wanted to be in the region, which meant a lot to me. I studied Arabic and Hebrew. And people asked me at my law faculty back in the 1980s, they said, I didn't know you were Jewish. What have you got to do with these Jewish beasts? I thought you were Catholic.
Oh, wow.
And that was the 1980s. And now the same people from the same background of Christian conservative, like the ÖVP, they are very Semitophilic. By the way, it was Austria with a handful of other countries, I think 7 or 8 small countries from the Caribbean, which voted several times in the General Assembly against the humanitarian armistice in Gaza, several times. So Austria, maybe yes, the rise of anti-Semitism, you got it on a global level, unfortunately, for a number of reasons, long list of reasons. But what is going on in Austria is you have a very Semitophilic government, media, decision makers. They stand with Israel, unconditional support for Israel. You have a much more serious reporting on Gaza in France, in Italy than in Austria or Germany. History, but Austria is a microcosm, a tiny little microcosm of a larger Central European unease with Russia. It's the inferiority complex, very strong inferiority complex. And the Austrians, unfortunately, at many instances in history, and that's why they started 2 world wars, did not know actually who they were.
Wow, I think we must have another conversation about the subject, because I've never heard it discussed quite in this way, especially from someone coming from this region. And I think in Russia, the perception is usually that that kind of hostilities normally comes from London. So if you're available, we loved having you. Whenever you're available, we would love to have another conversation and perhaps dive a little bit deeper into history. And also, you being a specialist on the Middle East, it would be fascinating to get your perspective as someone who not only studied those topics, but also physically lived in the region in multiple countries. So that would be amazing as well. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining us on such a short notice. Good luck with the pursuits that you've described to us. I'm sure they'll all work out. Thank you so much, Dr. Karin. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name.
No, you pronounced it in a very nice way. Me too. It was a pleasure talking to the two of you. Warm regards to Ferrara and to Montana. And I hope to welcome all of you on Planet Russia.
Eventually.
Fingers crossed, yes. Back home on planet Russia. Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
Yeah, remember all the links on the description, including the Telegram channel for those who wants to follow Dr. Karin. Okay? Thank you very much. See you next time. Thank you, Dr. Karin. See you next time.